Good morning, everyone. Morning. Yeah, we got a lively crew here. Welcome, and excited to have you for our third and final day of Chow. I hope everybody's been enjoying themselves the last 2 days and having an opportunity to learn a little bit more and engage in some interesting discussions and dialogues on oceans and Great Lakes issues. For me, Chow is really about, we're here, we have 3 days where we can celebrate our champions, we can hear about interesting issues, we can learn more, we have a chance to talk with people that really care about issues. On the opening session on the first day, I challenged everybody to think about actions now that they could take either individually or in partnership with others to start making a difference. So as we start now here our third day, I hope that's been part of your thoughts as we go forward, because we really do want to come out of Chow, not just having had a dialogue, but move that dialogue towards action to really lead to greater conservation in our oceans, coast, and Great Lakes. So hopefully people have been thinking about that, and we're going to try to find a way to kind of capture what people think our actions really should be coming out of this conference. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Once again, I can't say how important it is that we have such strong sponsors for this program that allow us to put on a 3-day program for free with people. So it's really much to their credit. I want to thank our co-hosts, the Campbell Foundation, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and the Ocean Foundation, our champion sponsors, IFAL and the Philip Stevenson Foundation, and all our friends, partners, and contributors. And I particularly want to thank our signature sponsors, NOAA, the Vulcan Incorporated, and the Walton Family Foundation. And we're going to see a couple of videos from them now. My favorite image is when that shark kind of comes out at us from the image, and I keep thinking we really needed 3D glasses this year too, but we'll work on it for next year. Anyhow, today we're going to kind of take a deeper dive into a few issues. One is really focusing on our optimism for our oceans by looking at how local state action can really build national movements for conservation. We're also going to look at the social and health impacts of our ocean. We're going to end the day with what I think is a really broad visionary panel about why we explore. Why are our oceans so important to us, and why do we want to explore them and learn and know more about them? So before I introduce our moderator, let me just give a couple of reminders that during the course of the conversation this morning and throughout the day, question cards are on your seat, so if you want to submit questions to them to the panel, please use those. For those of you that are joining us online, you can tweet your questions to #Chow2017 at Marine Sanctuary. And don't forget, if you need to know anything about the program, visit the Chow app, Chow 2017. So this morning we're very lucky to have Dr. Russell Callender, who's the Assistant Administrator of NOAA's National Ocean Service, to lead a discussion on how we can use our oceans sustainably for the long-term health of our planet. And we have a great group of panelists that are going to talk from various different perspectives about why they see optimism for our ocean, but it's optimism if we can actually take action to help conserve them. So without that, let me turn it over to Russell.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Russell Callender, and as Chris said, I'm the Assistant Administrator, which is a fancy bureaucratic title for the Director of NOAA's Ocean Service. For me, my love of the ocean is both personal and professional. I've been a diver for over 40 years, and I've seen firsthand the degradation of coral reefs and other coastal habitats in my lifetime. I've also seen the benefits firsthand of marine protected areas, habitat restoration, and really the value of education and outreach in conserving and enhancing coastal places that I care deeply about. Today, I'm really excited to be here. We have an amazing, passionate panel who are all ocean optimists. These are people who have found reasons for hope, and I look forward to hearing their stories, learning what has motivated them, and celebrate some successes together so that we can all learn from the amazing expertise of this panel. What I'd like to do now is key up a very quick video. It's about a minute to help set the stage, and then I'll briefly introduce the panelists, and pun intended, we will dive in. So if I can cue up the video, please. Pretty fantastic in a 1-minute video.
Yeah.
So let me introduce the panelists. First to my left is Nancy Knowlton. She's a Sant Chair for Marine Science at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. She has a long history of working to expand the ocean conservation conversation beyond doom and gloom, beginning with a series of symposia called Beyond the Obituaries, Success Stories in Ocean Conservation. More recently, she was a co-founder of the Ocean Optimism movement and co-host of the recent Earth Optimism Summit. She's also an accomplished coral reef biologist and member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Next is Bob Dooley. He's a commercial fisherman from Half Moon Bay, California. He's a member of the Seafood Harvesters of America and the past president of the United Catcher Boats. He's been a commercial fisherman for over 40 years and is the co-owner of a commercial fishing company that operates along the West Coast and in Alaska. Mr. Dooley has advocated for managing West Coast trawl fisheries with catch shares for years and has testified before Congress about the effectiveness of catch shares in Alaskan fisheries. Next is Charles Littman. He is the lead scientist for NOAA's Fisheries Hawaiian Monk Seal Research Program. He's a conservation biologist with expertise in marine mammal ecology, endangered species conservation, climate change, and science communication. Dr. Littman has spent the last 15 years conducting research on the biology and ecology of endangered Hawaiian monk seals. With his team and partners, that information has been used to develop the world's most proactive marine mammal conservation program and has put monk seals on the long road to recovery. And last and absolutely not least is Monica Goldberg. She's the Chief Counsel for Oceans at the Environmental Defense Fund. She leads the U.S. Oceans Program's work on legislative and administrative initiatives and oversees any litigation undertaken by the program. She also coordinates the U.S. program's work on highly migratory species. Ms. Goldberg has extensive experience with ocean law and can speak to the importance of legislation in accomplishing ocean conservation successes. So welcome to all the panelists.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do is we'll start out with a series of questions that I'll tee up. I'll hit each of the panelists and ask the other panelists to dive in if they've got additional comments. We'll also be receiving questions along the way. somebody will be running up with cards with your questions. So if you have questions, raise your hands, and they will bring you a card that you can write your question on. We'll also get some questions online. So let's dive in. Start with Nancy. So Nancy, you wrote a great piece in Nature earlier this year about the origins of the ocean optimism movement. Could you share some of your insights about what has inspired the movement and some ideas about lessons that we can learn from this?
Thanks. Well, what really inspired the movement was the time I spent at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where with my husband, Jeremy Jackson, we created the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. And part of that was a very interdisciplinary course, kind of boot camp for ocean conservation that we held every summer. And we always began with the state of the ocean. And as you can imagine, you can do that in a variety of ways, but often the traditional way has always been a pretty depressing bludgeoning of all the horrible things that have gone wrong with the ocean for the last several decades or even centuries in some cases. And I started to think about the program we were running as medical school for the ocean, but in that context, in medical school, you don't teach soon-to-be doctors to write obituaries of their patients, and yet I felt that what we were doing was training our students to write ever more refined obituaries of the ocean and nature in general. And so that's what led to the Beyond the Obituaries symposia, where I brought together people to talk about what was working. And then it turned out that there were other people around the world doing similar things. And in a small workshop that we held in the UK in 2014, just before World Oceans Day, we sort of shared our experiences talking about the importance of having optimism on the table when discussing the state of the ocean. And at that workshop, we launched a Twitter campaign called #OceanOptimism, which is referred to in that video. And it's since, and so we launched it. We've never had a budget for it. It just really spread by, well, word of mouth, word of tweets. And it's reached about 80 million Twitter accounts at this point with absolutely no PR budget at all. And I think it's a testimony to two things. One is something actually that social scientists have known for a really, really long time, which if you present people with really large problems without solutions, the result is they completely tune out. It's disempowering, it's disengaging if people are presented with a problem that seems really big, but that there are no solutions presented. And so I think people in the conservation world have been a little late coming to that realization, but I think there's now pretty widespread recognition that doom and gloom, only doom and gloom, is not going to lead us forward in terms of public engagement. We're not going to really make progress unless we have the public on our side. But the other thing I've learned in the process of working on this project is the amount of success stories that are out there that no one knows anything about, including in the ocean conservation world. And the example I often use is the story of the recovery of the seagrasses in Tampa Bay, which deteriorated enormously over several decades because of pollution and other kinds of damage. But the citizens of Tampa got together, passed rules to clean up the water and help promote the recovery. At the end of 2015, it was announced that seagrass beds in Tampa Bay had returned to 1950s levels, which is an incredible success. And how many of you know about this success? All right, well, that's good, it's improving. I have told that story to about 300 people, including 200 scientists at the meeting, at an annual meeting on the Gulf of Mexico, which was taking place in Tampa. And I asked the audience of 200 people how many of them had heard that story, and only 4 people raised their hands. So if the marine conservation world is completely unaware of the successes they've had, obviously the public and policymakers are going to be unaware as well. So those are kind of what I've learned and why I think this whole ocean optimism, actually now Earth optimism, has had such a powerful effect on people.
Thanks, Nancy. Does any of the panelists have any opening comments or reacting to this?
Congratulations.
All right, we'll keep rolling. So, Bob, I'm going to pick on you next. Okay. Why are you optimistic about the future of sustainable fisheries, and how has the Magnuson-Stevens Act led to improvements in this area?
Well, I would have to say that after, a 40-plus year fishery career, starting out, Magnuson wasn't there at all, and U.S. groundfish fisheries weren't there very much at all. But as they built up, and as they started, displacing the foreign fisheries, we ended up with a situation where we're overcapitalized. And the one thing fishing in Alaska, we always had, particularly after the Magnuson Act, we had strong science, and fishermen believed in that science. That enabled us to be sure that when they set a quota, that we understood that was a reasonable quota, and it was reasonable for the longevity of the fishery. The problem with our fishery early on was it was overcapitalized. They never limited effort, so it was a big race to the bottom. And when you race for fish without some type of rationalized program, the price is paid for by the fish. And that's the one thing we can't have a fishery without is fish. So along came American Fisheries Act. Senator Stevens, in his wisdom, saw industry tearing itself apart in the largest fishery in the United States. And we were racing to bankruptcy. It was pretty dismal. But the big thing was the fish were suffering, and the biggest population of fish we have in the United States. He came to the rescue, started the American Fisheries Act, which in essence, some people say privatized a fishery. But what it did, it matched the harvest to the amount of fish, and gave us the ability to self-govern, which you hear, particularly environmental groups, tell you that, well, that's the fox guarding the hen house. But it wasn't the fox guarding the hen house. It was the farmer guarding the chickens. That's what it was. We got to control our destiny. We weren't racing for any fish. We were racing for the right fish. Not racing, we were the currency of the fishery wasn't catch all you can catch. It's now catch the right fish at the right time, for the right market, for the right price, and you have a fixed quota and every fish counts. So it gets back to the other part of it that's really optimistic. And in some corners, it's feared, but me coming from where I come from and been through a couple of these programs, accountability is key. You have to have confidence in what is being harvested to sustain a population of fish. First, you have to have an adequate and trusted accounting of the fish, which is done very well by NEMS, very well by the stock assessments. But you also have to have a confidence of what's removed. You have to have accountability, you have to have oversight. That's something fishermen generally resist. But once you understand that the Magnuson Act requires that every fish that's caught be accounted for, and absent that accountability, they have to take a conservative estimate of what they think is not being accounted for. And I'm sure you've heard this in many places where fishermen say there's lots of fish out there. And the regulators say there's not much fish out there. How can those both be true? Well, it can be when there's no accountability, because that uncertainty that they're required to remove from the top of the fishery before they allocate creates that, a low quota, but actually a high biomass. But it's uncertainty that does that. That's lost revenue, that's lost production in our fisheries, and it all stems from accountability. On the West Coast, we've developed a catch share program because we were in the same situation in the early 2000s or late 90s. We were racing to the bottom. The fishery was declared a disaster in 2003. Industry, not the agency, not the councils, came forward and said, we need to have a catch share program. We need to rationalize this fishery. There's too many fishermen, there's not enough fish, and the thing that suffers is the fish, not the fishermen. Well, we were suffering. We were racing to the bottom and going broke. But we can't have a fishery without fish. We had 15 stocks, I believe, that were overfished. We now only have 2. I understand one of them is coming off the list this coming year. So, and we've done that since 2011. In what is that, 7 years. And it's because now there's total accountability. There's 100% coverage, observer coverage, human observer coverage on every vessel. Now transitioning to electronic monitoring in a lot of cases for cost and for actually a better job, more accountability. So I'm optimistic. I think I hear a lot of naysayers around the country. West Coast and Alaska, we're all in. We've seen the bottom. We don't like that. We see the future. We like that a lot. We have more fish now. Fish stocks are in excellent health. We're fighting to get our markets back. We've lost our markets on the West Coast to all the farm fish and foreign imports because since 2003, we've been in disaster. Fisheries been artificially constrained. Markets, infrastructure, all of these things have disappeared. But what we have now is we have fish, and that's the most important ingredient. And a real good friend of mine, he told me, he said, you want to get something done? Tell a fisherman he can't do it. And that's the truth. I've seen it time and time again. Gear innovation, avoiding bycatch, all of those things, when you're individually accountable, creates a success story. And in my opinion, the first thing is fish. We've actually created, in our risk pools and our cooperative structures, to avoid bycatch, we've created sanctuaries and marine protected areas in contractual private agreements so that we all, as a group, can get our fish harvested within the amount of fish that's allotted. So I guess I better stop there.
So I'm going to follow up on another sustainable fishing related question. I'm going to go to Monica on this one. So I've heard about this upside bioeconomic model that suggests that if sustainable fishing becomes the norm, our oceans may be able to produce more fish in the water, more food on the plate, and more prosperity for our fishing communities. This seems like an amazingly optimistic outcome. Can you tell us, Monica, a little bit more about this line of research from your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for asking about it because it has international relevance. I mean, obviously this panel and my focus is on domestic law, but internationally we have even more challenges in the fisheries area and need that optimism even more because of the reliance of human populations on fish for protein in so many societies. So the UCSB's Bren School and EDF undertook an analysis of over 7,000 fisheries and did as detailed a dive as you can do with the data into what would happen under a business as usual scenario and some improved management scenarios. And the best case outcomes did show those triple benefits to the environment, for food security, and also for productivity for fishermen from an economic point of view, such that there were projected increase of 17 million metric tons per year in terms of catch, $90 billion more in terms of economic activity, and 782 million metric tons more of biomass in the water. So that was published in PNAS about a year ago now, so it's available. And the authors then did a follow-up because one of the things that we're all deeply worried about is the impact of climate change on fisheries, especially for communities that are deeply dependent on fish as a protein source. And what they found was that and this hasn't been published yet, it's less well publicized, but it's the impact is variable, and that improved management can reduce any localized impacts to communities from climate change. And basically, management is more powerful than climate change. In other words, we will be able, if we have the political will and the ability to stick to the science and show the sometimes difficult choices of trade-offs to manage around climate change such that the impact is sort of netted out. And we still will see those improvements even in the face of climate change. So it's very exciting research.
Sounds exciting, thank you. So Charles, let me go to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with marine mammal conservation, and in particular, what is some of the keys that you've seen to success in the Hawaiian monk seal conservation?
Happy to talk about monk seals. So asking the same question, how many people here have heard about Hawaiian monk seals? Okay, it's so much better. So that's 15 years of work paying off here.
There you go.
So I've only been with the program for 15 years. It's been going on since the late 1970s. So monk seals were the first marine mammal listed as endangered under the ESA and protected under the MMPA. And for the longest time, the program focused on population monitoring. It's the foundation, so we talked about the value of good science. We have the luxury of having this amazing data set that underpins everything that we're doing because early people in the program had the foresight to set up a robust science program. And for the longest time, we watched the population decline. It was in 2007 or 2008. At one of our recovery team meetings, one of our recovery team panelists, the late Dan Goodman, made a very powerful statement that we were a recovery program that was monitoring a species to death. So we had incredible science, but we're not really focused on the conservation activities. And our pitch for monk seals was, again, that doom and gloom. It was the sky is falling, population's been in free fall since the 1950s. Come to our help, come to our help, come to our help. We need more money, we need more support. So at about 2007, we made that pivot to, okay, we're going to stop monitoring only the population, we're going to save it. We shifted to a conservation program, but more importantly, we were going to start talking about our successes, and we were going to start marketing it as we have a long way to go. And I sometimes get uncomfortable using the word marketing, but in many ways, that's what this is. And so started to look at what difference we really had been making for these years. Even though we were perceived as just a monitoring program, we knew all of our animals basically from the day they're born until the day they die. We've tracked them through their entire lives. And we could actually look back at that at that time was roughly 25 or so years of recovery activity. And at that time, we were able to determine with pretty good certainty, low error, that some 20% of the population that was alive today, or at that time, was there because of our recovery efforts and that of our partners. And suddenly having that statistic was amazing for our leadership in NOAA, for our NGO partners to see, okay, so a relatively low, consistent effort. So we call it the silver BB. Everybody wants the silver bullet for conservation. So it was all these small-scale opportunistic interventions were actually making a difference. What if we really concerted our efforts and really tried to make a change? And so in 2007, we made that pivot, and now the population is no longer declining, has been increasing for the last 3 years, about 3% per year. About 30% of the population is alive today because of our collective efforts recovering the population. As the population grows, that number might go down, but that's a good thing. And we have more partners than ever because people saw a cause worth fighting for, that it was going to be a good investment of their time. So the best example for that is our partner, the Marine Mammal Center out of Sausalito, California, world leaders on marine mammal rehabilitation, but rehabbing animals that are, many of them are pretty high abundance. So it's still doing a good service, but not necessarily conservation directed. So they came in, they built privately a $3 million monk seal hospital that all they do is rehab animals. So this is a cohort of animals we lost every year, which is disheartening as a conservation program, knowing that these young animals are going to starve to death. And now are bringing them in, and in just a couple of years, they've already rehabbed 2% of the population. So things are looking good. When I started, our population was 1,100 or so, and now it's 1,400. So a long way to go, but thankfully because of our science, because of good communication, because of good partners, can say, to date, we are successful, but have a ways to go.
So one of the questions I got from the audience is actually a good follow-up. Says, isn't this the year of the monk seal? What does that mean?
It's a good question. The power of social media and things is you can declare things and they take off. So I and a couple of my partners in Hawaii declared 2017 in the year of the monk seal. Mainly it's 10 years since our last recovery plan came out, so we wanted to highlight these successes. And the real focus, one of the programs that NOAA Fisheries put forward is the Species in the Spotlight. So it's this focus on 8 endangered species that are in great need but have some capacity to be recovered. So it's really trying to optimize those conservation efforts. And part of that is, the big thing is not necessarily directing more federal resources to it, but it's galvanizing partnerships. It's bringing people to the table in order to partner with the federal government to achieve conservation goals. And so that's the big part of the year of the Monk Seal, is doing exciting things and dynamic things. So it's, you know, finding a partner to brew a beer with, to fund an NGO and creative stuff. But it's basically to get more attention for our partners so that they can do more of the good work and shoulder a lot of the responsibility with us.
Yeah, I would agree that partnerships kind of across the board in the conservation efforts that we've talked about, touched on here, is it's the only way to go.
Yeah.
So I've got another question. I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, and this is really for any and all of the panel. What do you think is more important, researching the illnesses, their words, and challenges that impact corals and animals in the ocean, or political actions and regulations to try to deal with the challenges? I see Monica's eyes light up down there.
Well, the answer is yes, of course. They're both critically important. But my sense is that a lot of challenges, we actually have a good handle on what solutions are. It's a question of political will to get them done. And to create that political will, we need invested citizens who care and are willing to express that concern. And I'll give an example just in the fisheries realm, where I'm familiar with the Magnuson Act provisions that Bob was discussing. We have seen with fisheries law a tremendous increase in the number of recovered species in the United States, a reduction in overfishing, and those have all followed directly from improvements to the law. So we know that when we have those improvements and we have the political will to follow through with them, then you can be optimistic about, especially U.S. fisheries, and to the extent we can improve management around the world, all around the world. But we need to stay willing to follow the science and do the hard decisions when they come. I mean, my optimism this morning is tempered by the fact that yesterday NOAA announced a new rule that stated in the Federal Register notice that the approach will necessarily mean that the private recreational sector will substantially exceed their annual catch limit. And this in the face of a legal requirement to establish annual catch limits and ensure accountability with them, as Bob referenced. So it just underlines that we need to keep the political will to follow the science once we have it. But no question, and there's others on the panel that can speak more to the value and importance of the science as we go forward.
Other perspectives for the panel on that question?
I guess I would. I don't know how you cannot do one of those, and it gets back to the partnership thing. So it is in whether it's fisheries, whether it's marine mammal conservation, or other species conservation. I think it's bringing together a team so that you have people that are political will is huge, and there are particular groups that are good at advocating and pushing the science and doing those sorts of things, but. I think the importance about the science is that continuing to monitor is the early detection system, right? So we are in a constantly evolving world. We are faced with some unprecedented threats, you know, and so for conservation, it's building resiliency in species, so dealing with the threats that you can, but continuing to be prepared for emerging ones and being very focused on solutions, not a laundry list of these are all the threats, but here's all the opportunities to make a difference. So I think they have to go hand in hand, and they have to both continue, but it's finding the right people and the right partnerships to be carrying that load while the scientists are out in the field doing the work.
I guess I would say also I'm a scientist, and and I work on coral reefs, and there are certain big outstanding questions as to certain aspects of why corals die that we don't still know the answer to. So I'm a big believer in science, and obviously political will is incredibly important, as several people have mentioned. I guess I would broaden the definition of political will and remind everyone that, you know, this is called Capitol Hill Ocean Week, but there are Capitol Hills and, mayors and town councils and governors, and there's a lot of stuff happening in the U.S. and around the world, which is bottom up rather than top down. And so I think it's really important to remember the bottom up process with respect to getting things done. A lot of these success stories, the ones that I've learned about over the course of a decade, and I have to say it's really interesting because I've been doing this for a decade, and until I joined this panel, I didn't actually know the details of the success of the wine mug seal program. So there's so much to learn and so much for people to be inspired by and to participate in. And I think that is, we sometimes in the drama of following the news here in Washington, D.C., we lose track of all the stuff that's happening on all sorts of different scales, and that's just as important as anything that happens from the top down.
I'm a big advocate of ground up rather than top down. I shake at the thought of just regulations. I think that when you empower the people that are regulated to actually help with the goals rather than just a stiff regulation, you get creativity. As long as you have accountability on top of that and transparency, you get the right result. And I know in fisheries, to change something, to affect change through a regulatory process is a long, drawn-out procedure. When you empower the people, that are the fishermen in this case, with the goals and empower them with the ability to live up to those goals, then you can have instant change. In just an example, in the Bering Sea pollock fishery, we have a 2 million metric ton cap. It's a quasi-conservation, but more political cap on the Bering Sea, 2 million metric tons of fish, all ground fish. That was put in years ago as a way to get rid of foreign fishing, because foreign fishing was dominant in Alaska. It was a way to phase that out. It became later a conservation goal for not really a lot of, in my opinion, good reasons. The science is so strong. But a result of that is non-commercial species like squid. Squid isn't a very big fishery in Alaska. We're just given even though the biomass was high, a very low allowable catch. Well, we got into a situation in the fishery where it became a bycatch species, unintended, no commercial value, nobody was selling it, but it was driving the fishery. It was going to drive the biggest fishery in the United States, pollock, to close like with 30% of the fish caught. It was huge. Nymphs National Marine Fisheries Service could close the fishery in a 3-week process. By then, everything was done. We were alerted about this, the industry, because we had a catch share program in the form of American Fisheries Act. In 18 hours, had everybody off those grounds, established our own closure, kept the fishery open, and limited the effect on squid. And that wasn't a biological effect on squid, because there was lots of squid, but once you set a total allowable catch, because an ACL has to be adhered to, and when you exceed that, nothing else can go on. So we'd have lost our fishery. And that's what I talk about, empowering the regulated by bringing them in as cooperative partners rather than just writing regulations and enforcing them.
So I'm going to put one of my questions and mash it up with one of the questions that I got from the audience. So it will be a 2-part question. Are we doing enough to celebrate our ocean successes? A couple of you have asked questions. Did you know about this? So question, are we doing enough to celebrate? And secondly, if we're using optimism and only using optimism to slow this, that might slow the urgency to enhance the oceans, how can we find that happy medium between the optimistic side and some of the quote unquote doom and gloom scenarios? What's that right balance? So are we doing enough to push the optimism out there, and what's that balance between the optimism and some of the other challenges that we see?
Well, maybe I'll start, because I get asked this question all the time. I think we're doing much better at talking about what's working. This panel is kind of testimony to that fact. And increasingly at international marine conservation congresses, there are sessions about what's working and a recognition that we need to talk about what's working so we can get more things to work and to not only just feel good, but actually use the lessons of what's working to replicate and scale up those kinds of efforts. It's important that that focus on what's working be put in the context of what the challenges are. And I think everyone who works in this kind of space of trying to talk about what's working and learning from it recognizes that just sort of Pollyanna optimism is not very good either. So needs to be realistic. But for decades, it was conservation has been such a doom and gloom crisis discipline. There was essentially nobody talking about what's working. So I think we still have a ways to go. It remains the case. I mean, the crazy thing about the hashtag Ocean Optimism is it remains the case that Twitter is one of the best ways to find out what's working. That to me seems nuts. We need a better, I mean, it's wonderful in a way, but that there's something. You can search hashtag Ocean Optimism on Twitter and find all sorts of things you might not otherwise know about. But we need a better framework so that people can find out what's working and share those successes. But I think the balance is improving. And it's hard to say if it's exactly right, but I think there is much more recognition about the importance of learning from and talking about success than there was a decade ago.
Thank you. Other perspectives?
Yeah. So adding on to that, when we made that change for monk seals in the way that we were going to talk about it, I mean, a lot of people brought up is you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot. They're going to think that everything is, we protected the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and people, that's where the bulk of monk seals were, and they thought, okay, it's great protection, monk seals are saved. And so it does become really important that you continue that message, as we still have a long way to go, but fear and doom and gloom cannot feed an activity or an action or a mission for very long. You have to have optimism. You have to see something down the road that you are working towards other than just trying to prevent extinction. You have to visualize these things that you want. There was a great quote from Fernandez in the Daniela at the social media presentation yesterday when her group activates millennials. And so it was really actually great hearing that millennials are really engaged or are interested. But her statement that they are results solution oriented, that if they're going to get behind something, they have to see that it's going to be meaningful or that there's actually going to be an action taken. And I think that's the thing is that's what optimism does. I think it sees people sort of an off-ramp of that hopelessness and is attractive. It's that realistic optimism, right? Yeah. We can do great things, but it's a long, hard road. But here are the options. Here are the solutions.
And that plays out in the policy advocacy. First of all, congratulations. You just rattled that off, that name of the National Marine Protected Area.
Lots of practice.
Congratulations. But I think it's also a balance in terms of policy advocacy because we all know from Schoolhouse Rock that legislation begins when someone says there ought to be a law. You're solving a problem is what most policymakers want to do, and the people who have problems are the ones who come to them and call them, and so they see those things and they want to address those things. So the challenge is if something is largely working, as we feel like fisheries management in the United States is under Magnus and Stevens, how do you remind people of that and have them not just take it for granted, such that those who are pointing to some of the difficulties, and there are definitely still challenges, and there's definitely ways that the implementation especially could be improved, but you need to keep reminding people that there are jobs and economic activity and recreational activities and just health of the oceans that's resulting from this already, and by reminding folks of that, it's reminding them of something they ought not to take for granted, and we need to continue protecting. So it's part of the advocacy on the Hill as well.
So I think, looking to the future, I mean, Charles talked about activating millennials. One of the questions I got is, why aren't we prioritizing trying to reach the youth of this country? They said 7 million ages 14 to 18 that are out there. I mean, there's, I would say, a target-rich environment to generate some optimism. So it might be something for us to consider moving forward, is how do we push this kind of message out there? And how do we reach the youth of this country? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that specifically.
Well, I think it's one of those situations where there is a lot being done, but you can always do more. So in Hawaii, there are various programs that, I think 4th grade is one of the key grades where students are learning biology. So there are programs across the island. I think almost every student now is talked to about coral reef issues and monk seal issues and those sorts of things. And a lot of those are grassroots efforts. They're supported by some NOS programs and others, but a lot of it is grassroots. I think you are seeing even some television shows that are coming now that are very youth-directed in terms of marine conservation issues, but a long way to go. But I do think it is, I see it dealing with monk seals, it's that old dog, new tricks thing. So we were trying to create a culture of coexistence in the main Hawaiian Islands. Monk seals had never been there or hadn't been there for 800 years. They've recently returned, so you have generations of fishermen and people that live in Hawaii that don't know about monk seals and occasionally accuse us that we've secretly moved them into the main Hawaiian Islands. But you can only go so far in conversations, and we've made a lot of advances with particularly fishermen, but have really focused that we're going to change the next generation so that they know what it is to be with the monk seal on the beach and how to act and respect them as part of the environment and know their kuleana and responsibility for taking care of them. But so I think there are a lot of groups that realize the value of educating the next generation.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot going on with young people. The Blue Vision Summit has a Benchley Award for youth activism. There were, at the Earth Optimism Summit, 1/3 of the audience was young people. We had a rapper from London who rapped the UN sustainability goals. I mean, there's a whole program called.
That's a challenge right there.
Yeah, no, it's a great rap video. Actually, it's fabulous. So I think I think some of them are, I think we could do a better job of increasing the visibility of what's happening in that sphere, in addition to just doing more of it. But I think the efforts tend to be, they don't tend to necessarily get the publicity outside their local areas that they should get. So I think we could do a lot more in that front as well. But it's not like young people are being ignored. I think people everywhere are recognizing that that's where the future is, obviously, by definition.
I think from a fishing perspective, we have a great concern for the lack of young people in fisheries. And, first off, I'd say that, it's nice to talk about the health of the ocean fisheries-wise, but remember, fishermen are the ones who are out there doing it. And probably, given the right situations where we're not mandated to throw fish over the side as we were prior to the catch shares on the West Coast, mandated to actually discard fish. That, when we're there, we are the farmers of the sea. We protect it. It's our livelihood, has been for years. It's all I've ever known. But getting young people involved is and saying that message of that we're not just out there pillaging the ocean, that we're actually, harvesters. We're actually the people that are actually maintaining the status and keeping the oceans clean and we have the greatest concern for that. So the graying of the fleet is a huge concern. And so there are efforts now starting to try to teach young people that fishermen aren't just people that work with their hands. They need to know a lot of things. I mean, when I first started, I wouldn't be up here, I'll tell you that. It was, that was all about boats, but you come to learn that you have to be involved in all of it. You have to know mechanics, you have to know fishing, you have to know business, you have to know politics, you have to know all of it to be in business. And you have to know conservation. You have to know how to be sustainable. And I think those are great messages. I have to reflect back on going down to Pike Street in Seattle, and walking down there and seeing the lady with the clipboard, with the Greenpeace, telling me, don't you, he goes, would you sign my petition? I said, what's it for? I said, well, don't you know that there's big trawlers just over the horizon out there, foreign trawlers, raping and pillaging our oceans? I said, this is a couple years ago. And I said, have you ever heard of the Magnuson-Stevens Act? He goes, no. I go, well, that was established the 200-mile limit. That was done in 1976. There are no foreign trawlers out there fishing on our coasts. That isn't happening. Well, they told us that. That's the message that has to go away. Fishermen are not raping and pillaging by and large. The ones that are in rationalized programs are far, far from that. And I think we need to get young people involved because, if we don't have clean oceans, we don't have abundant fish populations, the world starves. So we need to have that. So that's all I'd have to say.
We're getting more questions than we've got time, but let me. I'm not sure how I can do all this, but I do have a question that I absolutely wanted to get to, so I'm going to hit that next, and then if we got time, I'll hit maybe one more of these. But this is about this conversation's about the future fundamentally, and so as we look to the future, what we've seen in the past have been some generations of ocean champions. Jacques Cousteau, Sylvia Earle, congressionally, Sam Farr, Senator Whitehouse, currently now others. They've been instrumental in spreading positive messages around ocean conservation. What's the next ocean champion going to look like? What kind of background will they have? Where are they going to come from? Which I'm looking at here too, because that's probably where they are.
I'll start with that. I think it's a very different world now, sort of back in the days with Jacques Cousteau. I think it was, in some ways, simpler to communicate, and there was limited media in order to do that. So people were locked onto their televisions, so you could touch a lot of people with messages and inspire that way. The discussion yesterday about sort of how to break through all this noise, I think it's not going to be individuals. Or an individual, it's going to be multiple people. I think one of the biggest things, if you were at the Emerging Leaders panel on the first day, Ayanna Richardson, I think, made the comment when she looked at the panel. She's like, if the future looks like us, it's looking pretty good. And I totally agree with that. It is, the future people are going to be more diverse. They're not going to look like me. They're going to be speaking messages that their communities connect with them as representatives of their communities. I think they're going to have to be disruptors within their industry or within their agency or within their NGO. So as I said before, we have a lot of challenges in the future, and we're going to have to be incredibly creative and incredibly innovative. And we're going to have to give those people space to do that, because even the most passionate, myself included in that, passionate people for conservation, we get set in our ways, and change is difficult. It's human nature. And when our program has brought some controversial ideas and new things for conservation, initially they are reluctantly greeted, and they are now policy for us, and they're just well accepted. But I think things are going to, we are going to have to get ready for big change, and it's going to be those people that step up to take that challenge to force change are going to be the most valuable people for all of our efforts.
Other thoughts?
I guess not so much in terms of background, but in terms of temperament. I feel like, I hope, I don't know if this will happen, but what I hope is that the next ocean champions are people who are positive and inspire and create an atmosphere of trust and work from a positive, bipartisan, in the Washington sense, bipartisan, working together, getting people to trust each other. I mean, I think a lot of the problems we have to do with the fact that people don't trust each other, and therefore they're not willing to let things work from the bottom up. Because I mean, that's where I think the whole motivation this kind of distrusting of different partners. I've been thinking a lot about this because as I've watched this whole process of ocean optimism grow, I think I've thought a lot about people like Nelson Mandela, who I don't know how many of you have read or seen the movie Invictus, where he used a symbol of white apartheid, or apartheid in South Africa, and the all-white rugby team to build trust across all these groups of people in South Africa that were so distrustful and so angry. So I do feel that the next ocean champions and those ocean leaders are going to have to do. It's not so much about the details of their background, it's almost their ability to inspire people to work together and trust each other again. That's what I would like to see in a future ocean champion.
I think that the ocean champions of the future will be not the people who spread the message, but people that actually implement the message. And I think to empower people to not just follow regulatory schemes, but actually be part of making the soup and actually implementing it and giving them the power to change as it goes along, to be able to actually refine systems rather than through a regulatory process. Establish the goals. It's really obvious to me the message is clear. The message is being heard by vast numbers of people. We don't have to, it's not about selling the message. It's about empowering people that they can affect change. And I see it in fisheries, in rationalized fisheries, particularly in catch share programs, where fishermen are innovating and being the innovators and affect change, rather than feeling like they're regulated, they feel like they're part of the solution and can change things.
And I would probably add to that, Bob, that we're privileged to work with a lot of people throughout the seafood supply chain, so chefs and those who connecting directly the fishermen with their markets so that they get the fresher, higher value products, and other innovators like that who are thinking differently about and disrupting the normal channels of maybe bulk frozen thinking to more of a local and individualized way of marketing and adding value that way. So I feel like I'm surrounded by champions for sustainable fishing just because I'm lucky that way. And there is an issue with the graying of the fleet, but there are also quite a few younger fishermen entering the policy area because they see that these fisheries have recovered and they're like, oh yeah, so this is a future. It can be a future because we've started to rebuild.
So I'm getting the evil signal of it's about time to be done here. So just very quickly to try to wrap up. This was a start, I think, of an amazing conversation. It was an amazing conversation in and of itself. But what I think I heard over and over is the future is out here in this audience. The future is what we're seeing here at Capitol Hill Ocean Week. There's a lot of successes that we're having. We need to celebrate it. We need to balance it. We need to ensure that as we continue to look for successes, it's bottom up, and it's basically empowering the individuals on the ground that are doing the actual work to continue to move and inspire those successes. So that was a quick wrap up to a very interesting panel, but with that, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time and effort to join us here. I appreciate your passion, your drive, your intellect, and your willingness to come play here today, so thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists this morning for a great conversation. Really appreciate that. We have a short break now. We'll see everybody back here at 11 a.m. for Waves of Plastic. Don't forget, Oceans Live is taking place during our breaks. I hope you'll tune in. And once again, I really want to thank the great team at Ocean Live for putting on additional programming during Capitol Hill Ocean Week. So see you at 11 o'clock. That's great. All right, what we're going to try to do is quickly squeeze a picture in.